So my question is, how do you responsibly teach immigration to ninth graders, and what resources would you recommend to better my own knowledge on immigration so that way I can give that wealth of knowledge to my students?
I don't know if you're familiar with the book that was published maybe a year or so ago by Javier Zamora called Solito. It's in English. And I actually just read that book to my 8th grade grandson, although it's written for adult audiences. Um, but so Javier is an immigrant from El Salvador who crossed the border alone. That's the title of the book, Solito, which means alone, like a small person alone, when he was 9 years old. And so as an adult, he reconstructs that experience. So it's told from the perspective of a 9-year-old, even though it's written for an adult audience, not a 9-year-old audience. But because he's perceiving it, he's describing what he perceived as a child. I think it's very appropriate for young adult audiences. And, he doesn't understand everything that he experiences. So if you're teaching the book, you would need to fill in some explanations, like obviously because he's a child. But it is just it's a page turner. It's just really gripping, and it offers so much to talk about, like, why do people migrate? I mean, in the case of Javier, and it's not a unique case, both of his parents are already in the United States. So he's being raised by relatives in El Salvador. He talks about how, as a young child in El Salvador, how he's exposed to the United States through the media, through the gifts his parents send home, and what it's like to cross the border as a child alone. I've read it like 5 times because I read it myself, and then I read it to my grandson, and then I've taught the book, and I would never get tired of the book. I just could keep reading it over and over and over again. So, as a teacher, you would definitely need to help kids process it. And, some terrible things happen in the book. But these are also terrible things that children do experience. So, the idea that we have to protect children, young people, young adults from reading about terrible things kind of denies the fact that a lot of kids live through terrible things. And if we pretend that all children live in suburban houses with white picket fences and pet dogs, then, we're denying the experience of a lot of our students. So yeah, I really recommend that book. And interestingly, I'm reading another book from the point of view of a child with in my Latinos in the US class. Well, I taught the book Solito in my graduate class, and I'm teaching the undergraduate Latinos in the US right now. And we're starting with a book called Barrio Boy by Ernesto Galarza. And it's another one told from the point of view of a child, but it's set in early 20th century Mexico. And it describes his experience traveling with his mother, living in a small village in Mexico at the turn of the century, growing up there. And then the different outside factors that come into his village that lead to his family's decision to flee. And it's just really striking. Well, it's important because around the time of the Mexican Revolution is when we first start seeing large-scale Mexican migration to the US. But so many of the factors that cause his family to flee are exactly the same factors that are causing people to flee today. And you can really see the role of the United States in creating those factors in both of the books as well. I just feel like it makes a really interesting counterpoint. And it's also, he's writing it as an adult, but he's describing his experiences as a kindergartner, 5, 6, 7-year-old, being forced to leave the village and the very long journey they make to get to the US.